When Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, India was excited.
ब्रिटेन के नए प्रधानमंत्री भारतीय मूल के ऋषि सुनक होंगे।
Rishi Sunak, first Indian origin Prime Minister.
He was hailed as a symbol of pride for Indians. After all, this was one of our own making it big on the world stage. But Sunak has been in office for around 2 years now, and his record has not been impressive. That's especially when it comes to India, the country that was so excited about Sunak in the first place. From his advocacy against Indian immigrants to his failure to deliver a much-awaited trade deal, Sunak hasn't been all that good for India. On this episode of Threadbare, we're going to ask a simple question. Has Rishi Sunak been a disappointment when it comes to India? And we're going to give you 3 big reasons why that's the case. Let's start with the first and the most important, Indian migration to the UK. It's no secret that Sunak's government has been seen as hostile to immigrants coming to the United Kingdom. Over the last 10 years, the country's population has grown by around 2.2 million people because of its accepting policy towards immigrants from all around the world. Now, there's been criticism that the UK is simply taking too many people. Sunak's Conservative Party believes that there's a popular demand to close the country's borders and to take the country back. So, a top goal of his government has been to cut foreign immigration to Britain. But this hasn't just targeted illegal immigration. A major target of Sunak's government has actually been reducing the migration of skilled, educated workers to the United Kingdom.
Levels of legal migration to this country are too high, Mr. Speaker, and that's what I believe also, which is why it is right that we are taking decisive action to bring the numbers down. And, Mr. Speaker, that plan is working. In the first 3 months of this year, the visas issued are down by 25%, Mr. Speaker.
To achieve that, Sunak's government has tightened visa laws considerably. For example, his government substantially increased the minimum salary threshold needed for skilled workers to move to the United Kingdom. So, for example, earlier, you needed an annual salary of £26,200 to move to the UK. But thanks to Desh Ka Damad Rishi Sunak, that annual salary threshold was raised sharply to £38,700 a year. Indian skilled workers will undoubtedly be hit by this. Another change that was applied was to permanent residents who wanted to bring their family members to join them in the UK. So let's say you're an Indian who lives in the UK and you want to bring your family along to join you. Earlier, you needed an annual salary of £18,600 to do that. But that annual salary threshold was raised to £29,000 a year in 2024. And that measure made immigration a lot harder for many Indian families. By the way, Sunak is not done. According to Britain's Parliament, there are plans to raise that minimum threshold to around £34,500 in 2024 and finally to around £38,700 by 2025. Let's also take a look at education. Every year, thousands of Indian students travel to the UK to pursue their undergraduate or postgraduate degrees in the country. In fact, in 2021-2022, a massive 126,535 students from India were studying in the UK. That made Indians the second largest group of international students in the UK, right after China. Now, these students contribute billions of pounds to the British economy by paying for tuition and living costs. And they're not working, so they don't take away jobs from British citizens. Immigration can be pretty controversial, but almost everyone agrees on one thing. International students are a very good thing. But apparently, Rishi Sunak doesn't agree. Over the last few years, Sunak has tried to bring in policies that will make it harder for Indian students to make it to the UK. For example, his government announced plans to review and possibly cancel the all-important graduate visa route. Now, this is an important scheme which allows students finishing degrees in the UK to work in the country for some years after their degrees have concluded. Now, this move set alarm bells ringing for Indian students interested in studying in the UK. After all, the chance to work abroad after your degree is a big part of the reason why anyone chooses to study abroad. The National Indian Students and Alumni Union of the UK released a public letter to Sunak urging the British government to keep this scheme. In its letter, NISA pointed out that around 70% of Indian students told the union that the ability to work after graduating was a big factor in choosing a study abroad destination. Ultimately, Sunak's government decided to spare the graduate visa scheme. But that wasn't because of Rishi Sunak. Senior members of his cabinet, like Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and Education Minister Gillian Keegan, revolted against any attempt to cancel the scheme. So the graduate visa route survived, but Rishi Sunak doesn't get any of the credit. In addition, the UK's Home Ministry has stated that it will keep the program under review, which isn't exactly reassuring to students. And Sunak has actually taken steps to make life difficult for international students. How exactly? Well, firstly, the UK Home Office announced that financial maintenance requirements will be raised for international students. It has heavily restricted international students from also bringing over dependents to the UK. That measure, along with a few others, is expected to reduce migration to the UK by 153,000. All of this has already reduced interest among Indian students in studying in the UK. Official statistics, for example, showed a 4% drop in applications from India to study in UK undergraduate programs this year. And the number of sponsored study visa grants for Indian master's students fell by over 21,000 this year. That's a 16% drop in a single year. So Indian professionals and students seem to be getting the message that Sunak's UK doesn't really want them. And you can't blame them. Look at who Sunak has chosen to design his immigration policy. His first Home Minister was Suella Braverman, a politician with Indian roots. She's someone who's described the influx of asylum seekers arriving on British coasts as an invasion. And she's of course best known in India for her controversial comments that Indians were the biggest group of migrants overstaying their visas in the UK. The Indian government hotly denied that accusation. She was also clearly against working with India to allow more talent to flow between India and the United Kingdom. Now, Braverman was fired last year, but the British government's hostile policy to immigration has continued. Here's what Home Secretary James Cleverly had to say recently. We have taken decisive and necessary action to deliver the largest cut in legal migration in our country's history. Applications are already falling down sharply, down by almost a quarter on key routes in the first 4 months of this year compared to last, with the full impact of our package still to be seen. So Sunak's government is proud that fewer students, and yes, fewer Indian students, will be able to come to the UK. So it's absolutely clear that Sunak's India connection has meant very little when it comes to one of the building blocks of the India-UK relationship. And all of this is related to Sunak's next big failure, the India-UK Free Trade Agreement. When Sunak came to office in October 2022, everyone was talking about this landmark agreement.
A free trade agreement.
फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट
हम यूके के साथ भी एफटीए पर आगे बढ़ना चाहेंगे.
The idea of such a free trade agreement is to cut tariffs, ease investment, and generally make trade between countries easier and more free. And this trade is supposed to deliver economic benefits to both sides.
This will truly generate both direct and indirect jobs in both countries and help people in our quest for greater prosperity.
In 2022, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised a Diwali deadline by which both countries would sign this deal.
As the next round of talks begins here next week, we're telling our negotiators, get it done by Diwali.
2 years of Sunak later, and we still haven't seen an agreement. Now, it's important to note that trade agreements are complex documents, and blaming one particular side for failing talks isn't necessarily fair. But it's also important to note that Sunak's policy on migration has been a big reason why the agreement hasn't gone through. Indian businesses in the UK, especially in the services sector, want an easier and more flexible migration system. After all, they need talent to move freely between India and the UK. But the Sunak government's opposition to immigration into the UK has made any compromise on this matter difficult. So the two countries have blown through one deadline after the other, and we've still got no deal. Sunak's third big failure in India has been security. In March last year, pro-Khalistan protesters attacked the Indian High Commission in London and pulled down the national flag. The protesters were angered by a national manhunt launched in India for Amritpal Singh, a radical preacher who has also now been elected a member of parliament. Now, these attacks caused a diplomatic incident in the bilateral relationship. India's foreign ministry summoned a senior British diplomat to explain why security around India's High Commission had been so lacking. This is also important since India's London mission has seen periodic attacks over the years. There was considerable anger within the Indian government and even among the general public about this. Soon afterwards, security barricades were actually removed from the UK High Commission in New Delhi. And this was widely seen as a tit-for-tat move by the Indian government, punishing the UK. Even beyond the immediate security problem, there was one big question. Why is the UK giving space to extremist elements who would do such a thing? That's a question for which the UK hasn't really had a good answer. And it happened on Rishi Sunak's watch. Sunak has had a very rough 2 years in office as Prime Minister. He is easily the most unpopular politician in his country right now, and he's headed for a general election that he's very likely to lose. He's also at the head of a party that is deeply divided and constantly bickering. To sum up, Sunak becoming the first British Asian to serve as the country's Prime Minister was undoubtedly a historic moment for the country. It is also a big moment for Indians who felt proud of his achievement and celebrated it the way they do when any person of Indian origin makes it big. But let's be clear, Sunak's record in India has been a disappointment. Thanks for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Mattu. Please do tune in again next week on India Today Global.